welcome to this session of Shape Your Future for our Careers in STEM webinar series. Today, we are going to hear from two great scientists, hopefully two, we're waiting on one, but we've got some fantastic research that they do, and we're going to talk about all the great things that happen on the journey from school to science research. So firstly, I would like to acknowledge that we are meeting from different places around Australia, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of land from which I meet, and I'm joining you from Ngunnawal and Ngambri land here in Canberra. And I encourage you to learn about the lands on which you are meeting and joining us today. I pay respects to elders past and present, and to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are joining us today. As we share and discuss our knowledge and practices, we acknowledge the deep knowledge forever embedded in country and custodianship of country. So today we've got Associate Professor John Newby and Associate Professor Ying Lims, who are working in the brain, but in two very different areas. And they have their journey to share with you today. If you have any questions, please drop them in the chat and in the Q&A, not the chat. And we will get to them in the discussion at the end. So I'm going to hand over to Associate Professor Ying Lims. I love to use the full job titles, who's going to talk to you about her journey and work with Alzheimer's disease.
Thank you so much, Camille. Hopefully everyone can see my screen and also hear me. Thank you so much for inviting me to come and speak with all of you about my research journey. So I'm an associate professor at the Turner Institute at Monash University. It doesn't sort of, an associate professor doesn't really, that title itself doesn't really sort of mean much. What I do is that I'm a neuropsychologist and I specialize in Alzheimer's disease. And what that means is that I run studies and experiments really to try and understand the disease. As much as we hear the term Alzheimer's disease quite a bit, and there's a lot of media attention around it, the reality is that we actually don't know very much about the disease. Part of the reason is because it's a very long disease. So it develops over a really, really long period of time. And it requires a lot of effort and time and energy and money really to track people and to try and understand who develops the disease, why they develop it, and then how can we treat it. I use a lot of statistics in my job. I never thought of myself as somebody who enjoyed math very much, but being a psychologist means that having to use statistics quite a bit, and over the years I've actually learned to have a lot of fun with it. Aside from understanding human behavior and manifestations of human behavior like memory and thinking, but also mood and things like that, I also have to understand a lot of biology. So I've had to brush up a lot on my high school biology, high school chemistry, particularly around genetics, blood, neuroimaging, cerebrospinal fluid. So we collate all of this information and we try and make sense of how the disease develops. I also run a lot of clinical trials, and what that means is that usually there is an intervention or a drug that we think might intervene with the disease process, and we randomize people. So we develop a really carefully designed study. We bring a group of people in and we randomize them. So like tossing a coin, we put them into groups that receive the treatment or receive a placebo or a control treatment, and then we test experimentally whether or not our drug or intervention worked in these people. So clinical trials are typically seen in the scientific world as having the highest level of evidence because it's highly controlled. Usually we're just testing one thing, and we want to make sure it's the highest form of sort of human experimentation that we can do. I also, as part of my role, supervise a lot of students, mentor early career researchers. This is probably one of the best parts of my job, being able to meet young, bright students and being able to see and mentor them through the scientific process, and watch them develop, watch them grow, give them opportunities for growth as well. And then obviously a really, really big part of the job is communicating our results, right? So, you know, we can do all this fabulous science, but if we're unable to, you know, bring the public along with us, or unable to communicate our results effectively, then you know, it does our, you know, does science a very big sort of disjustice. So formally, we write papers as scientists, but we also give presentations. But you know, we also engage in a lot of the media. So writing for The Conversation, for example. We also do, like, I also do a lot of interviews with like TV or radio shows. You know, we have newsletters that we send out to our participants. We engage with sort of broader kind of community-based groups. So for example, in Australia, the peak sort of philanthropic body for dementia and Alzheimer's disease is Dementia Australia, and they do a lot of outreach work into the community. So I have very close relationships with them, and I do, you know, talks and you know, fundraising and things like that with them as well. And then the last point is really about collaboration. So you know, to do 21st century science these days, it's almost impossible to do it without collaboration. What that means is that I work with a lot of people from around the world with various levels of expertise. So I'm a neuropsychologist. That means that, you know, I understand what happens to the brain clinically, and what you know, I test people formally on measures of memory, attention, things like executive function, and we see how their thinking and memory skills are. But you know, I'm not a biologist, for example. I'm not a neuroimaging specialist. I might know about these things and understand the basics of them, but I'm certainly not an expert in these areas. And so to be able to do, you know, impactful science, I'll need to collaborate and work with people who are experts in these areas, so that we can, you know, better understand it, or better, you know, move the field forward. More in sort of a little bit more detail, what I do is ultimately to understand the natural history of Alzheimer's disease. I do this by working with and setting up cohorts of the disease. And so what that means is that I gather a lot of people together. So the Healthy Brain Project, for example, is a big cohort of people all around Australia. So this map just shows you all the people around Australia who are part of the Healthy Brain Project, and we follow them over time, and we measure them systematically every year. We measure their, you know, we measure their memory abilities, we measure their mood, we measure their lifestyle, you know, we collect genetics from them, all sorts of things, to try and understand the progression of people who are at risk of developing this disease. In order to enable such large-scale data collection, I utilize digital, so like web-based, smartphone-based technologies to better assess these people. So then I've had to, as a psychologist, also had to learn how to speak the language of tech and like really understand, you know, tech design, user interface, things like that, to really, you know, develop tools that might be useful to be able to assess people who might be at risk. These are the names of all the different cohorts that I work with. I know that they don't mean sort of anything to you, but the point really is to indicate that there's a lot of data in the world out there now. Everyone, you know, in America and Europe and Australia, everyone's really trying to understand, you know, Alzheimer's disease. But what that gives us an opportunity to do as well is harmonize that data from multiple cohorts, right? So you know, I'll be collecting, you know, all the tests and the surveys that I collect. Somebody else might be collecting tests and surveys that they're collecting. As much as possible, we try and standardize that collection so that we can pull that data together, right, to ask better and bigger questions. And ultimately, it's really, for me, it's really to identify risk and protective factors of the disease. So why do some people develop it earlier? Why do some people develop it later? What can we do to try and intervene or delay the onset of Alzheimer's disease? Just a little bit, like, you know, about me and how I got here. I was born in Singapore. And then I moved to Brunei because that was where my dad is from. So Brunei is this little tiny country on the island of Borneo. So I moved to Brunei when I was probably like 3 months old. My mom was from Singapore, grew up there, grew up in an international school, and then moved to Melbourne in 2005 to do my Bachelor of Arts in Psychology at the University of Melbourne. And my pathway is supposed to become, in my sort of formal tertiary education was to do my undergrad, to do honors. Honors is really, really competitive. So I don't think that, I quite kind of realized that when I first started. And then if you want to be a clinician, you do your master's. And initially I thought that I wanted to be a clinician. So I did my master's in clinical psychology. And then after that, I did my PhD in neuropsychology at the University of Melbourne. And that's when I started to really specialize in Alzheimer's disease. After that, I went and did my postdoc in America. So a postdoc is what happens after your PhD. It's like another sort of training, a couple of years where you train formally under a research group or an expert. So I split my time across Providence in Rhode Island and St. Louis in Missouri. And that was super fun. I had a lot of fun in my time there. Got snowed in a lot. This is my car and the pile of snow next to it. That was super, super fun. Also learned a lot, made a lot of really good friends during that time as well. And then I came back. So what happened was I got a fellowship from Australia to come back to Australia. And that's where I started to formally start to establish my lab. So I started at the Florey Institute, was there for quite a number of years before moving to the Turner Institute at Monash in 2020, where I was offered a position as an associate professor. Have I always known what I wanted to do? Yes and no. Like I've always been interested in understanding people, be it through psychology, biology, literature, philosophy, or religion. I've always kind of sought out and been curious about, what makes people tick. I was initially actually interested in sports and music. So I played a lot of tennis in my youth, and I also played a lot of music. So I played the piano and the violin. And so I was super interested in like combining the two. So I really wanted to be a music therapist at one point, but also super interested in psychology. So I decided to pursue my undergrad in psychology and literature. I always thought that I would be a clinician. And certainly when I first started out, that was the aim, that, I would be a clinician. But then, as I got into the research sphere a little bit more, I realized that this was really fun. This was actually what I wanted to do more. So now I am just a full-time researcher. I don't do any clinical work anymore. I think the clinical training was really helpful, but certainly I just do research full-time, part-time biostatistician. So I do a lot of statistics as part of my job. But at the same time, I feel like I'm still evolving in terms of what I want to ultimately do. And I think the great thing about this journey of becoming a scientist is that you pick up skills, and you realize that you actually don't have to be boxed into one thing that you do. You can see where different opportunities take you, and kind of go for it. So psychology wasn't offered in my high school. So I took biology, which is an obvious one, chemistry as well, hated it, but actually turned out to be useful, especially now as I'm dealing with sort of more drug trials and things like that. Mathematics, I was always good at it, but I wouldn't say that I loved it, and certainly didn't love statistics at all. In fact, struggled through statistics for a really, really long time. And it wasn't until my fourth year, like an honors year at uni, that I came across a really, really great statistics lecturer who made statistics applied, and I could see where it was going and how I could apply statistics. That it was only then that it became fun. But if you love statistics, that's always a great thing to get your head around. And then literature was always an unexpected benefit for me, I think, because so much of English and really, I mean, literature across all countries is about the human condition. And so I think that really kind of gave me a deeper sort of perspective on the broader sort of philosophy about what it was like to be human and psychology in general. So that I found that really helpful to have in my bag. So it's just kind of some broader advice. I think is to stay curious. Don't be afraid of pursuing parallel interests. I think as kids, we're such natural scientists. And to sort of paraphrase the great Carl Sagan, science, I think, is more about a way of thinking rather than it is about a particular topic or a particular subject area. I think science is a way of us sort of organizing all of our curiosities. And so be curious, ask questions, find out, why things work the way they are, challenge them. I think that's probably one of the greatest things about being a scientist. And I think this is more sort of general rather than to science, but consistency is key. I think sometimes we often feel like we have to wait until we're motivated to do something. Consistency leaves motivation for dead. Just show up, even if you don't feel like it, just show up and do a little bit. It's better than doing nothing. And then seek out opportunities. I think you guys are in a great position here with this, the STELR program. Reach out to scientists that you might be interested in meeting or speaking to. I certainly know, I know sometimes, thinking back to my high school self, I sometimes feel like, oh, well, I'd feel a bit shy about emailing, an author or a scientist or anything like that. But more often than not, you'll be surprised to see how much we love actually hearing from young high school students and who are interested in our work or just interested in the subject area in general. I think it's a great opportunity to shadow them for a day or come visit the lab or just have a better insight into what research life is like. So certainly reach out and seek those opportunities out. And it's okay to make mistakes. It's how we learn, right? So I think that we don't fail well. I don't think that we learn how to fail very well. And so mistakes are actually a big part of the learning process, and it's actually a big part of science itself. And finally, I as a high school student, I think I always thought of scientists as being physicists or chemists or something like that. You actually don't have to be if physics or chemistry or anything like that is not your jam. You don't have to be that to be a scientist. Like a social scientist or psychologist is also a scientist. So certainly again, science is really about the way we think about the world and rather than a particular sort of subject area. Right, that's sort of it from me. Thank you. I hope that was helpful.
That's fabulous. So great. Yeah, it was lovely to, as you say, you're not in a traditional science area. So we will now hear from Associate Professor Jill Newby, who's going to be our second speaker today and talk about her work with brains and her journey in STEM. So over to you, Jill.
Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen. I probably just need to check that you are able to see the screen. Just share this one and I will start. Are you able to see my slides now? Oh, wonderful. Okay, great. So thanks so much for having me, and it's really great to be speaking to you all about the work that I do and how I got here and some of the advice I might have for you and looking back on my career as well. So I'm Jill Newby. I'm an associate professor and a clinical psychologist at the Black Dog Institute, and I'm also affiliated with the University of New South Wales School of Psychology here in Sydney. I put my email there. As Ying was talking about, we're always happy to be emailed to look at different opportunities that we can give people and sort of hear about what you're interested in. So feel free to email me if you have any questions or want to talk through anything. So what do I do? I started at the Black Dog Institute at the start of 2020, just at the start of the pandemic, unfortunately. Since I've stopped my PhD, I've really been working in two main areas of research. So the first is understanding anxiety and depression, primarily in adults, so from 18 older. That includes research studies to understand the causes and what maintains anxiety and depression in people who experience that. And then the other part of my work has been looking at developing, testing, and then disseminating solutions to help people manage their mental health, especially people who are at very high risk of depression and anxiety, and those who are experiencing these conditions. Most of my work has been done in digital mental health, so I'll give a few examples of that. I'm really interested in how we can take evidence-based or effective treatments, mainly psychological treatments, and help reach the most people we can across Australia. So looking at how we can increase access to treatment, make treatment more standardised and more affordable for people, regardless of where they live or what their background is. So some examples of work that I've done, I've just put a screenshot there of one of the programs that we're working on at the moment. So I've worked in online treatment programs. So this is where people can access a program that teaches them how to manage their mental health from their own home. So using principles of cognitive behavioural therapy, which is a very structured type of therapy for mental health. Well, I'm also looking at digital assessments and different ways of diagnosing mental health conditions so we can intervene early and help prevent sort of lifelong impairment with people. More recently, I've been doing work in developing smartphone apps for mental health and virtual reality or augmented reality to figure out how we can make treatments a bit more accessible and a bit easier to use, and harnessing the benefits of technology to help people in need. So a recent example I've been working on is called the Vibe Up app. It's actually delivering very brief interventions, including physical activity, mindfulness, and sleep information for university students who are distressed. Because we know just from the pandemic that it's really affected young people the worst compared to other age groups. And we know that, young people and university students are often really time poor. So what we've developed together with the developer team and user experience team is apps to help people in need. And what we're also working on in the study is a really cool program of research where we're using machine learning and artificial intelligence to help test and compare which treatment is going to work best for who. So what does my day-to-day look like? So I'm going to focus more on my role as a mental health researcher, and then talk a little bit about when I am doing clinical work as a clinical psychologist. So I do a lot of sort of similar things to Ying, as she was talking about before. The majority of my day is probably spent in meetings because I collaborate with a lot of different people. I supervise students, so that is undergraduate students, master's students, PhDs, and I also supervise more senior researchers, so postdoctoral fellows and other academic researchers. I spend some of my time teaching, so teaching undergraduate or postgraduate students who are learning how to become clinicians or clinical psychologists. I spend part of my time doing data analysis and statistics, so looking at analysing the results of the studies that I run. We run like clinical studies where we interview patients or clients with anxiety and depressive conditions. We also run clinical trials where we test out these new digital mental health interventions. So we need to analyse that data to look at how well those programs are working and look at what improvements we need to make for the next version of it. I do a lot of reading and learning, so learning about the research literature, learning about different studies that other people are doing, learning about new methods and techniques that we can bring into our research. And quite a significant part of my role is writing and editing. So I write journal articles for sort of scientific outlets. I write media articles. I write treatment programs, so that's like information about skills to manage depression and anxiety. I write info sheets for the Black Dog website to help people better understand about mental health. And then articles for the general community, like The Conversation. I also do talks and presentations, podcasts and interviews as well, including media interviews. So some of my week is like spent doing those sorts of things. But it's really around engaging with the community, because when we do science and we don't share that with anyone, it's not really going to benefit many people except for the very few people that might read our research articles. So it's really important for me to take what we learned in a very scientific, jargony way and to make that really accessible to the community so more people can learn about the exciting work that we're doing and the impact that we're making on the community. Now, when I do clinical work, so I don't see people face to face, but I do support people with assessment and treatment in the clinical studies that we do in the randomized control trials. So part of that involves assessments and interviews with participants. So that might be diagnostic interviews that we do over the phone or in person. And then also supporting clients through therapy. So that might involve phone calls with clients who experience an anxiety disorder, for example, and support them through anywhere between a 1-week intensive treatment program all the way up to a 12-week intervention, and sort of tracking and helping them troubleshoot how to learn about how to manage their mental health. Now, how did I get here? I went to high school at a public high school in Sydney, south of Sydney. I did all of my degrees at UNSW. I did a Bachelor of Psychology first, which took 4 years, and then I decided to do a Master's and PhD in clinical psychology. Once I did that, then I actually moved to a clinical role at St Vincent's Hospital Anxiety Clinic, where I worked primarily with patients with anxiety and depression. And then I moved to Cambridge in the UK, where I spent a year doing a postdoctoral position. So that's a 1-year sort of research position under the supervision of a senior scientist. Then I came back for a postdoctoral fellowship, which took 4 years. And then I moved over to the School of Psychology at UNSW, where I got a lecturer position and then progressed up the ranks to associate professor. And just a couple of years ago, I've moved over to the Black Dog Institute to primarily focus on research as opposed to teaching and research. So when did I know? I think I still don't know. So I really love my job, but there's always opportunities to pursue. And I don't know what my whole career is going to look like. Really, in high school, I had no idea what I wanted to do. A lot of people were asking me what I was going to do with my life, what I was going to do in my education, what I was going to do at uni. And I had no idea. I was looking at all sorts of different opportunities and courses at the open days of the different universities like Sydney Uni and UNSW. And to be completely honest, I went to some of the open days and I just found the people at the open days just boring, and it didn't sound very exciting what they were doing. And so in the end, I made the decision about psychology because I really liked the lady who was at the open day. She seemed like a really nice person. She seemed really interested in what she did. At school, I loved English and maths and science, and it sounded like psychology was a way to bring those different areas of knowledge and things that I enjoyed doing together. And like Ying, I also thought I was going to be a clinician, a clinical psychologist. So after honours, I did honours in an animal neuroscience research project. And I actually enrolled in the PhD because it provided me a scholarship to support my master's. So by doing the two, then it actually paid a bit of a wage for me to help with my master's. So I figured I'd actually drop out of the PhD but still get that scholarship. But in the end, I started my PhD and I realised I really love doing both clinical work and research. And that's where I've ended up. Not just being a psychologist full time, but actually combining those two. So it's really just a random chance that I started psychology and then another random chance that I ended up in full-time research. So in high school, I did these subjects. I actually really loved maths in particular and English. And I also did science in biology and chemistry, and then history. And I think all of those really prepared me well for psychology because it is so varied and it gets to utilise all these different skills. Now, we were also asked about the opportunities and paths I took. I really need to acknowledge that I'm in a really privileged position in that I was able to live at home while I went to university. My parents are very educated, and so I had opportunities that I know other people don't have. So I was able to volunteer in some roles in undergraduate, and I ended up getting a lot of different research or positions through the people I knew. So it's really like the people and the relationships that you establish throughout your studies and throughout your career, which are actually the most important in getting jobs. Some things were around good timing, and then I moved positions when I wanted to pursue something different or new or interesting, or wanted to actually look at enhancing different parts of my skill set. So I think this is my final slide, but just looking at any advice. So I'd say to you all who are considering what you want to do is that it's really okay not to know, and it's okay to change your mind. I've had a few changes of my mind and changes of role throughout my career. And I know a lot of other people that have not just one career, but many careers, and there's lots of exciting opportunities to be able to take throughout that. So it means that you sort of need to take the pressure off about that first decision that you made about if you want to go to university and what you do, because you can change and that's absolutely fine. I'd also say try before you buy. So I did a volunteering role with Lifeline to see whether I wanted to do counselling, and I found that really helpful because I did like it. But I know other people who have done that and decided that they didn't like it, which meant they didn't pursue a clinical career. I'd also say do what you find really interesting and what's important to you. For my work, what's really important to me is doing work that makes a difference for other people. And I find psychology a really great way to do that because you can do research that has a direct positive impact on people's lives. And I think that's a really important part of what we do. And also there isn't one career. Often people have many different careers, but university and science or psychological science really helps you. It helps you with specific skills in the field, but the most important part of uni is the people that you meet. But it also teaches you how to think, how to learn, how to critically think, how to collaborate with other people, and how to communicate well. And all of those skills, there's so many different applications and so many different careers that you could do, and that's incredibly valuable. All right, so I think that's actually all I had to talk about today.
Was excellent, and I think we've seen a few direct comparisons between both of your journeys. I don't know what I'm going to do, and just picked a thing to go on. So, I mean, the one thing that I wanted to maybe ask both of you is you've done a little bit of clinical stuff, each of you, and you've got a bit of research. Is the clinical is obviously a little bit more direct contact with people in an actual situation. Do you find that enriching to the research side of what you do, or to help you out? And what do you kind of get out of those clinical situations that you don't get out of your research projects, I guess? Maybe Jill can start.
Do you want me to go first? Okay. Yeah, absolutely. I think I always notice when I'm missing it because I really love having that direct contact with clients and people. So you can see the benefit of your research on their lives. And that's really inspiring and motivating because it's sort of a good reminder about why you do what you do. It also helps really understand research questions that would make a difference to people in need. So just through those conversations or helping people or assessment or treatment, you can get really important questions that would make a difference for the people that our research is designed to benefit. And so from that sense, that the work that you do as a practitioner really helps the scientific work that you do and vice versa. And same goes for training. When you're training or supervising students, that helps feed that cycle as well because you get to think about different questions that you could ask in your research.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the clinical space is a great opportunity to understand how your research can be applied. I think one of the challenges of doing both clinical work and research is just time commitment. Being a researcher is such a is probably more than a full-time job, that it can be really challenging to both develop a world-class research program, but also have that time to spend with your patients and be present for them.
Yeah, it must be crazy. Yeah, Ning, I was wondering why you picked Alzheimer's disease, because it is a big important, but what kind of got you into it? Is it someone else?
Yeah, so it's a little bit personal. So I grew up with my grandmother, who then got Alzheimer's disease later on in her life, and so it was around that time where it came a point, that sort of natural junction that Jill pointed out, where you're choosing a career in research or going down that clinical path, and the opportunity to do a PhD in Alzheimer's disease and to try and understand it a little bit more came up, and so that was what I took.
Yeah, there's so many people. It's a personal connection to something that you want to find out with it. And Jill, Jill, you've got like digital learning, which we've all been doing everything online in the last couple of years. But is it really? Have you seen it being effective? That people, where traditionally we think you've got to meet a psychologist in person to get that help. Have you seen that people are getting benefits from doing the apps and the mental health, the telehealth stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. And to be honest, when I originally started, so I started work at St. Vincent's Anxiety Clinic, and they run a face-to-face clinic, but also an online clinic as well. It's now called This Way Up. And we've written a whole bunch of different treatment programs for different conditions, like different anxiety and depressive conditions, but also stress management and mindfulness and things like that. But when I originally started, I was extremely skeptical about it, because I trained as a psychologist. I thought the best practice is face-to-face therapy, that there's no replacement for that. And I don't think digital programs replace that really strong connection with a clinician. But yeah, what kept surprising me is seeing the results of both individual clients that I was helping through these programs, but also overall in our research studies. It can just make life changing improvements in people, and I just think it's so empowering to help people learn how to manage their own mental health, because they're often chronic conditions. They don't just come for a few months and go away. They often relapse and recur throughout their lives, and so that self-management is really important. But I would say that as a standalone thing, they don't necessarily work as well as when you have a clinician or someone supporting you through the programs. I think that seems to be critical to help people stay engaged. But yeah, they can work really well, surprisingly well.
Yeah, so I'm actually running a clinical trial at the moment that seeks to improve people's lifestyle behaviors to prevent further cognitive decline, and it's completely digital. We do have clinicians on board though, so those randomized to intervention will get time with a clinician to work through their goals and barriers and things like that. But certainly, we also, the advantage that we've seen is that it reaches areas of the country that previously might not have had that opportunity to participate. So, for example, rural and regional Australia, they might not be close to a hospital or a clinic to receive some of this help. They might not even be aware of some of the resources available, and I think that's been really powerful for them. So there's definitely opportunities, but like Jill, I don't think it will ever sort of replace that face-to-face connection, but it certainly does open up a lot of other exciting opportunities.
And it's been so important in COVID. Like, people just couldn't go to see a psychologist or a psychiatrist or other mental health clinicians, especially during lockdown. So those sorts of programs have played such a pivotal role in providing some support to people who needed it during that time. Been such a difficult time for so many people.
Yeah, the situation's kind of exacerbated it in a lot of people, and to have that be invaluable, I'm sure. I'm going to turn a little bit to a personal more personal on it. And I'm wondering, you guys say you've got a lot of things that you're doing in the media and everything. What's something you do when you're not doing science? Something you really enjoy doing that's not maybe science adjacent, but when you're not doing science?
I mean, I really love like physical activity, exercise. I really enjoy being active. I also love eating. So like looking at like going out to restaurants and trying different foods and things. I really love doing that. So I guess one balances out the other. I need the lifestyle intervention probably that you're talking about to prevent my dementia onsetting.
Yeah, I CrossFit a lot, and I read, previously pre-COVID, I would say I travel a lot. So I've sort of moved around quite a bit, and I think, inherent to sort of my identity is this idea of, being sort of not tied to one country in some ways. And so COVID's been really difficult for that. So trying to, hike and find things in my backyard to do.
Yeah. It's very important to do something completely different to what you do. And I guess the other question I love to ask our speakers is, what would you be doing if you weren't doing what you were? If there was that fork where you've gone this way, and Julia said there's multiple forks. If there was one thing you're like, if I wasn't this, I would be this instead.
I don't know. Part of me wanted to be a musician when I was younger because I really love music and I still play music. But then the other part of me, I was like just after high school when I was thinking about what I was wanting to do, I thought about vet science. And ironically, I didn't choose vet science because it was going to be a 5-year degree, because it's too long, even though I ended up doing an 8-year degree. So I think that's probably another path I would have taken. It's funny how you make those decisions at the time, even though as scientists, we end up studying like our entire life anyway, don't we? To keep learning.
Yeah, I think for me, I entertain the idea of being a medical doctor. So at honors, the junction for me was either to train to be a psychologist, or I actually took the GAMSAT and then got accepted into med school at ANU, and I decided to go with psychology instead. So every now and then I do have these thoughts of like, oh, maybe I could have been a doctor, like a medical doctor. But these days I think one of the unexpected things that have come out of my sort of journey is learning actually how much I enjoy the entrepreneurial side of research and the business side of research. And so every now and then I entertain some ideas of having a startup of some sorts and kind of going down that path. And yeah.
Great. I mean, and this thing, you've got options, and it's a million little decisions you make along the way and the people you meet. I think it was lovely, Julie said, I met someone, and simply because they really engaged with what they're doing, and I'm sure you've had multiple people doing the same thing in your path go, it's just like, yeah, I want to do what you're doing, and I want to be what you're doing. So I think it's fantastic. Well, I think we might wrap it up. We've had a fantastic chat today, and I've really enjoyed hearing about your paths and your work and your journeys today on our STEM career pathways. And we look forward to seeing all of your work be in action, and we're all going to benefit from this at some point, aren't we? We're all going to be in that, let's prevent the Alzheimer's disease onset. So thank you for joining us today, and there will be a feedback form sent to our audience members. If you could please fill that out, let us know what's good and what you'd like to see in future episodes of the series. So thank you for joining us.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks for having